databases that are harder to roll back, especially if it's a production database.
Yeah, please don't let your agents go loose on
Yeah, it's like,
your production
that's
database.
very scary.
I do believe a lot of those learnings of enabling humans isn't too different from how we enable agents in terms of giving them the right tools. Like developer enablement tooling was like a whole thing, and many companies even built their own things. Yes, those were for humans, but if you think about it, it's agent enablement tooling. Imagine you have loads and loads of coding agents. You can't just use necessarily Git, right? For if you think about that lovable scale. Like you can't just go in GitHub, you will hit like limits on how many repos you can create.
We're back debugging, and today we're going to be going over this blog post from my friend Davis, and I will preface it with he is my friend Davis, but that does not mean that we are going to go lightly on him. He wrote this awesome blog post, what I think is an awesome blog post.
It is an awesome post.
It's called How Agents Use Systems Differently. And the whole thesis is we have this new shape of computing, this new paradigm of agents, and they are far different at using compute and storage than humans are. And he breaks it down in this post, but we've got thoughts. We wanted to give a little debug on this.
Exactly.
I'm in the for camp.
I am in the camp of that. This article has a fantastic conclusion. I agree at this point with the overall conclusion. However, there are parts of it what I think requires debugging, because if engineers are reading this article, there is, in my opinion, some advice or things that are used for the argument that may steer people in a detrimental direction. So the thesis I agree with. However,
the thesis of agents are different than humans, which is a pretty
and that impacts. Yeah, and that impacts how we need to think about how we architect and design the systems with which the agents interact.
Mm-hmm. And we will preface this with Davis is an investor at Innovation Endeavors, and he's writing this almost in a way of baiting the collective founders, I think, to go out there and start something new and start companies that he hopes to one day meet.
Yeah. Okay, that is interesting context, because I'm reading this article as someone who's been in infrastructure and platform engineering for majority of my career, which the years are just passing by. And it's just getting scary.
We can stick with that. Majority of the career. We don't need to put a number on it. We don't have to say specifics.
Yes, I just like flying by faster than I can comprehend. So, okay, where do we start? I find it so tricky because I love the thesis because, yes, we need to rethink a little bit how our systems... Like, one of the things that are being brought up, for example, is the spikiness of traffic, for example. And that is very true. It can generate so much traffic and load on infrastructure. And what's interesting is that this is not just a service or platform provider problem. So, for example, if you are providing, said, database or data storage solution, the traffic problem itself is an infrastructure problem where there's so much to say. But that is true. There's a lot, and the behavior is very different. So I agree with that. There's in this article, he also talks about how agents are good at correcting their mistakes, and therefore there needs to be a path for correcting said mistakes, right? And how sort of the rise of the Git work trees that are being used quite a lot by coding agents, because that allows the isolation in a way and the ease of like retracing your steps back to where you were before so you can try again. And that is, for example, quite difficult with most data storage solutions because a database making a mistake in your database can be a quite hard rollback or step back to address.
Yeah. As you mentioned that, there's a few things that go through my head. One, on the spikiness, it is true that agents will create these short bursts, and the spikes come because you can now have that hub and spoke model and have
Yeah.
many agents doing things and potentially hitting the same API or hitting the same server and flooding it with many calls at once. It's not just a human doing it with
Yeah.
like call and response type thing. It is a lot of agents. It almost simulates a DDoS attack in a way.
Yeah.
And but it's what we're expecting from our AI agents. But then on the side of what you were talking about at the end there with like these databases that are harder to roll back, especially if it's a production database.
Yeah, please don't let your agents go loose on
Yeah,
like
it's like,
your production
that's
database.
very scary. However, I do think he brought up a great point, and one of my favorite my favorite things of this whole blog post is
Yeah.
how many different links he has to new stuff or blogs that he'll reference that I hadn't read, so I get to enrich myself by reading all
Yeah.
of the links.
Okay, you
But
actually went through and read all of the links. I did not go
I
to
won't
that
say
depth.
all of them, but I did a fair share of them,
Oh,
especially the
amazing.
stuff that was like, "Oh, I haven't seen that yet. What's this? What's he referencing there?" One of the references that he mentioned was Vera, which is a
Mm,
simulation for cloud services.
mm,
And so it simulates your cloud environment, and I
yeah.
think he was hinting at like, "Hey, we need to create something like Vera, but for your
Mm,
production databases, so that if you wanna roll something out or if an agent wants to make a change, it can
yeah.
simulate it first." And I
Exploring.
recently, yesterday or 2 days ago, I was talking to this guy who was working at Meta and some fancy
Okay.
title, and he was saying, "Yeah, we had that at Meta, and we actually also could replay, like, the
Yeah.
last day's worth of packets and traffic
I
and
like,
e everything that
yeah.
happened."
Yeah, like when I worked I don't know if I should I disclose. I don't know if I should disclose exactly. I worked somewhere
Yeah,
quite recently, but we also had the replay ability. I was especially you could replay, yeah, everything that happened in the last 24 hours, so you see how things would turn out. Like it was really good for testing and verification
exactly.
because you tested it against real production traffic patterns.
And that, for me, feels like the simulation database type of tools that we'll need if we want our agents to be able to or if we wanna feel confident
Mm.
of letting our agents do things and kind of like YOLOing into production.
I mean, I guess we all had that problem even with like how do we enable engineers? Like if you ever onboarded an engineer into a company or a team, the question of like, time to first like production deployed contribution, right?
Yeah,
How fast can you get a developer contributing to your product? And in a way, it didn't move at the speed that agents move, right? But I do believe a lot of those learnings of enabling humans isn't too different from how we enable agents in terms of giving them the right tools. Like developer enablement tooling was like a whole thing, and many companies even built their own things. Yes, those were for humans, but if you think about it, it's agent enablement tooling. But an important part in in the article though is that it's not about agent experience. The article is deliberately not about agent experience.
you
And now I
what so
felt
you
like I
think
was about to get into that.
uh, but yeah, he doesn't touch on that, but it is true that that is a whole area that could be called out since agents are different and they use systems differently, how do you set up your documentation? How do you set up your tools so they can be properly used by agents?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's MCP, but it goes way beyond that. How do you
Yeah.
optimize for an agent to be able to properly use what you want it to use
Yeah.
in a quick and easy way for it to understand?
And like make people often also like I was speaking to someone and they had all of this documentation about their internal system. And I'm like, that's great for agents if you can make that documentation available to agents in a way that they can get hold of the correct things at the correct
Yeah.
time. And there are loads of solutions out there today that help you like ingest your Confluence or whatever GitHub wikis or whatever you are using, right? To help you with that. I think it's like interesting. Overall though, like people need to think about the usage patterns. So if we come back to this article, like if you are designing, I think it's almost touching on like to me, it touches on like databases are almost a type of infrastructure, right? If you're looking at the scaffolding around how we even deploy or use, build software, agents being part of it's a good case study because we use agents a lot already for building
Mhm.
software. However, this does apply to other agents, but let's focus on those coding agents for a second. Like, imagine you have loads and loads of coding agents. You can't just use necessarily Git, right? Think about that lovable scale. Like you can't just go in GitHub, you will hit like limits on how many repos you can create if you use GitHub. Obviously, maybe now you've got to have to consider having your entire own Git
Mm.
storage solution if you really want to go down that route. However, agents can go crazy and create at scale, loads of repos and thin repos, for example. So thinking about how we enable these tools and these things in a way that actually matches up with how agents are behaving in their specific domain, because coding agents are not the only agents that exist. But when you provide services for agents that carry out quite large, interconnected, complex tasks like building software, where they need traffic infrastructure like networking, they need databases, they need somewhere to deploy onto, like the software needs to get deployed. Otherwise, it's kind of boring, just local host software. Unless that is what you want, by the way, that is acceptable for those who like it. But for those who want to distribute something over the internet, it kind of needs to deploy and run somewhere. And even, yeah. Anyway, there is a massive shift in how to think. And this is like something I talk about at my work all the time, like, because we provide like traffic management software. And it's like, yeah, people now don't sit and not write those configurations on their own. Like they will use the
Mm.
coding agents to write the configurations. So how do we enable the coding agents to interact with configuring the system rather
Yes.
than humans? And like that is a very real conversations for people that are providing software like that. So I agree with that overall thesis. I know I know I'm just rehashing and thinking out loud as usual, but am I sounding crazy, Demetrius, or am I sounding somewhat sane?
No, you're hitting on a lot of these points that resonated with me. And it's indeed the reason that I wanted to talk about this blog was because it feels like there are so many pieces. Like when you talk about the need to create so many Git repos, well, the second order effect of that is file systems become pretty popular and people start thinking, can we do everything in a file system? Do we even need Git? And where's the limits of GitHub
Yeah.
when we're having a lot of reliability issues and
Poor
we're hitting
GitHub.
yeah. What?
Poor GitHub. Maybe
I
GitHub
know.
is just being like
They're
abused
getting
by all the
pounded.
coding agents.
Exactly. And I like this description of very thin repos. If you go on Lovable and you create a website, you spin it up with a prompt, that's creating a GitHub whole repo. You may just go there once and then never come back to it, but
Well, you
Lovable
will
at the
only
scale
see
that
it.
they're
You will,
at. Yeah.
but keep in mind, you would only get a GitHub repo if you connect your GitHub account in Lovable. So it won't just go and create.
I didn't realize that. But
Yes.
it does beg to question, are folks hitting problems that these large hyperscalers have hit already? They're just hitting them earlier because they are really moving
Mm,
fast on certain vectors with the agentification of software.
mm,
And what I mean by that is, again, if you're at Meta or you're at a company like Google with
yeah.
the gigantic scale, you're
Mm,
not using GitHub because you know the
exactly.
limitations
Yeah. You have your
are
own.
not, yeah, you don't have that possibility. So now other folks are starting to see, wow, this actually is, we're hitting some limits here. How can we optimize, or what comes next? What would we need to create for our specific use case?
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting thing as well. Like, okay, so you just made me think about the difference between people who are building companies now
Mhm.
who, like, yeah, if I go back in my, like little life and think about, well, just even simple things, right? Just think about Docker Hub. Okay. So if you are working in an enterprise or a large company, you have your own container registry. You ain't going to Docker Hub unless
Mhm.
you're like you aren't for many reasons, right? Even if you use public images, they have been ingested into your container registry for security scanning and other, important things. Also, you have your own private like things. You ain't using a Docker Hub, especially not the public one. However, if you're just hanging out with Claude on your computer or some other coding agent that you like, you are likely pulling that. By the way, I've been pulling that really messed up my computer, by the way, but that's a different story. So you're gonna
Wait,
end up
no,
pulling.
go down that tangent. What happened?
So on my computer, I've been like having fun building all of these things, and I was running stuff, the Docker containers and all. So I had managed to pull down like 130 gigabytes of images.
Wow.
Like, not in a day, but, like, accumulated over, like, weeks and weeks, but,
Yeah, doing what?
like, they were just, like I was just exploring stuff, like, trying shit
Uh-huh.
out, right? Oh, sorry, now I'm saying bad words, but, like, I was just exploring things, and then suddenly that exploration came to a point where Claude told me there was no more free space on my disk.
It ruined the vibes.
So, um, I had to, most of those doc images were not, used for anything useful at that point. So anyway, so if you imagine you have loads of agents, not just Erica's crazy agent on her computer, like I wondering how Docker Hub is holding up with all the
Yeah.
billion of images. Service they provide at no cost for wonderful people, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that actually dovetails into my next point that I thought was really cool about this blog post on the high concurrency, and how, again,
mm,
it goes back to the shape of what agents are doing is different than how humans do it
yeah,
in many different ways, whether it's
yeah,
these super bursty, uh, compute intensive workloads that are going
yeah,
off and they're fast, and then they can just hang out and wait for a human for a long time to give
yeah,
something, or wait for something, some external factor. So it's like, boom, or expand a lot of
yeah,
agents and then come back and just sit dormant. The other one was kind of in line with that, is the search, and how
yeah,
now, normally, if you think about how a human searches, human will go and, back in the days when we used Google, we would type in the Google search bar and then
yeah,
click on a link, see if it's what we're looking for, go back, maybe click on the next link, scroll around, skim. All right, yeah, maybe this is it. And you ingest 2 or 3 different blog posts or
Yeah.
articles max. But agents don't do that. They fan out and they can ingest hundreds of source
Yeah.
material. And so when they search, they're going to search and again, burst out, grab 100 links, try and ingest all of that, and then
Yeah.
summarize it and find out what the common themes are, do a little bit of analysis on
Yeah.
it. And so that leads to a whole new revolution of, well, you have companies popping up that are creating search in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think just yesterday I saw that Exa raised like 250 million bucks because
Yeah.
they're one of the companies that are doing this. And
Mm.
another company that was doing this was like Talavi, and they got
Yeah.
bought by Nebius for a nice chunk of change, I think. And so this whole like agentic native search is a whole different world too. And the way that search is being done
Yeah.
and that data is being ingested is a whole new world.
Yeah. To be fair though, there is like, so it's quite interesting how agents interact with such services. However, that part of the article is where like I was having a bit of a like, no.
No, you got
Right?
beef with it?
Yeah.
Tell me. Explain,
No, more
explain.
like the recommendations that were made in the article for how things could be improved, right? Okay, so I used to work on such systems. So this was definitely a, a special interest for me for a period in
So
my life. So, maybe other people don't react to this in the way that I did. But so I was thinking about this, right? So one of the things in the article is saying, oh, we should like expose more of the like ranking and all of like effectively the underlying parameters of the algorithm, the search algorithm, into the interface. You
yeah,
see,
like we used to back in the day, which, sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I don't know if anybody really got into it, but I remember in high school when Google was first coming out, there was like, oh, you could be good at Google if
yeah,
you learn the special, put it in quotation marks or use a semicolon and that
yeah,
type of thing, use the plus button, whatever it may be,
yeah,
add a question mark, add an exclamation point. I don't remember all of it, but he
yeah.
was
Like I
almost
do minus
advocating.
this and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah, he was advocating for bringing that back because agents can understand that syntax much better than
Yeah.
humans can remember it.
The tricky part is the article actually advocates for bringing a lot more than just like search query syntax back. It
Okay.
advocates for exposing a lot more of
I didn't realize that.
yeah, because one thing that it brings up is, for example, there was like he made this argument around that search APIs have been created for humans to make it easier for humans to consume. However, I will strongly disagree with that is the reason for having removed the parameters, because I happen to have owned an API that exposed all of the parameters and had like loads of different things, all the way to external clients, okay, to help them search more effectively. Okay, so somewhere here it says it's like it was simplified for the purpose of humans. I can tell you
Yeah.
it was not. I did never simplify this for the purpose of humans. It was, yeah, be useful for humans. That I believe is a statement I did not agree with. If someone did, sure, maybe. But the reason for abstracting away these things is to abstract away the underlying implementation. Why? Not because we don't want people to, we aren't happy to tell people what engines and what algorithms we're using underneath. The reason is I probably will want to change it at some point. And I cannot deal with telling you when I change my underlying implementation. Because if I marry with you, even in contextual agentic understanding, but API contracts are even worse in this case. So I just want to caution people that it's very convenient, because this was convenient before agents, to
Yeah.
expose the ability for the client to craft its own relevancy ranking and all of that and weights, and really mess with the algorithm. Not mess with it, but tailor it to that specific use case. It's not something that is like, often that was actually easier, especially when you dealt with external clients and there were so many different requirements. It feels easier to just like let them figure it out on their side so we don't have to worry. But I got the problem where, well, we can make this better and we want to change the underlying engine. Now, their understanding on the other side no longer matches up. So then I had an idea, Demetrius. Maybe we need to think about, I don't disagree with allowing the ability for, whether even it is humans or agents, to have the ability to get what they need from a service, because that is fundamentally something I agree with. But we need to remain the flexibility of the owner of the service to keep improving that service without the risk of pissing everyone off. So then I thought, come back to MCP, you see. Then I thought, what if you leverage the MCP protocol to effectively, because I believe a good agent will consult, if you have it exposed to MCP, it will consult the MCP tools and you can bring context on how to use it within that protocol. So if I have a search service that you access over MCP, I could, if I do change how stuff works, I could effectively communicate that in the tool, like you can learn about it. So I am not married to my previous implementation just because you were using it before. Like, I can update my underlying. Sorry, this is very technical maybe, but I
No, I
don't
like
want your
it.
agent to get into some context. So this is how Erica's search engine works. And then no way of updating continuously its knowledge about how my thing works. But MCP, I believe, could possibly help bridge that problem so that I
Yes,
have
and
the
then
freedom
you're
to
just
update.
keeping an MCP server up to date and that tool up to date, as opposed to someone on their side having a skill or using a specific type of search
Yeah.
to go and comb the internet for answers.
But yeah, basically, I just want to make sure that if people want to get creative with, like, influencing, for example, the relevancy algorithm, as I may even change my underlying algorithm or my engine, like swap, or maybe I don't provide the one you used to use anymore. So now you have to use a different. So just don't want people to be in a situation, if you're a provider of services, that you feel now obliged to maintain something for forever and ever, because that was the pain with, REST APIs.
Oh. Tell
Like
me more about that.
well, the pain with REST APIs were, as soon as you had exposed the parameter, you were married to that one now for forever. So you'd be very, very worried. What's interesting for me is I did a talk about this years ago about how to, think about your APIs. And actually was quite funny to me is that what your friend is saying in his article is like about humans and agents, and it makes it sound like humans need these like really simple things. I actually made the opposite argument, but I wasn't talking about agents because this is pre the agentic era, because I'm talking like humans are flexible. If you tell a human, if you are interacting with my UI and I change my UI, you will be confused for a moment and you will readjust to the new UI. If we compare a UI to an API, if you think of a UI as an API for humans, right?
Yeah.
So humans interact with UIs, machines interact with APIs. But machines, they are not very flexible. They like things to be like they should be and that they were yesterday, because when they run their code again, it's the same code they ran yesterday. So if you change what I'm calling to the API, if you remove if you remove response fields, or you make parameters not usable anymore, or even required. They were optional before, but today they're required, and now the request is failing. That causes failures on your client. So in a way, I'd like to argue that what we have the benefit of now with agents is that they can be more flexible like humans. Like humans were flexible when you change the layout of your UI to rewire and understand there's been a change and they can still use the app. And I think agents now, in the same way with APIs, if you will, if you use MCP to help maybe give that tool interface context, you can allow an agent to be as flexible to an API change as a human is to a UI change, even though we know some humans are really upset when the UI of their favorite app changes. But that's a different story. I'm sure there'd be upset agents too. So
Basically, any anti-gravity user in the last week and a half is hooting and hollering because of all the changes that happened after Google I/O.
I have not paid attention to this. I feel like
They've been
I'm
chatting in
mm,
Slack about it, like,
mm.
"Can you all believe this? Cache isn't on by default, and the new UI updates are atrocious." Well, I would have gotten fired if I ever rolled this out. Like, I've been seeing some pretty funny
Oh,
comments in Slack.
people are upset. But yeah, so like, but to be fair though, they are still able to navigate it. They may be upset, but they can get around it. And I think that is what's interesting now, because APIs used to be this very like
Rigid.
rigid contract that was hard for us to change. Like if you were a provider of an API, this is why I was not exposing a lot of stuff for a search API or
Uh-huh.
any API, because I do not want to like commit to serving you this information or serving you or enabling you this feature, because maybe I don't want to maintain that feature in the future. Like,
And it's really hard to deprecate or what?
yes, because when you have loads of hundreds of clients, and especially if they start paying you money, right? It's kind of a hard thing to
So,
deprecate.
hey, yeah, that API call that you make,
Yeah.
like, thousands of times a second,
Mm.
no, it doesn't
Yeah.
exist anymore. Good
Yeah, we're
luck.
gonna kill that. And I mean, I've sat there on production issue calls where we removed something that was like, you know, experimental or not even like production, and people be like, You changed it? Now our thing ain't working. We've been depending on that in production." And I'm
Mm.
like, "Well, you shouldn't have." Like,
There's a
but
reason we specifically said, "Do not use this in production."
yeah.
But so the whole argument then, I'm not sure I see how that connects to the search queries and
Uh,
exposing the ability for you to have a much richer semantics when your agents want to go out and fan out and search hundreds of links, or just
well,
ingest data from hundreds of different links.
there is like what I'm trying to make sure is that no one reading this article decides to open up all of the query parameters in a
Yeah.
RESTful API to the search thing, because you have now committed to maintaining that, unless you have a strategy for ensuring that you
Ah, I see. Yeah.
communicate any changes, because if you change the underlying engine, your parameters are going to change. Like, stuff's going to change now. And then you need to make sure that any consumer of this is aware of the changes and the implications of the changes.
And so that's why you're more bullish on doing it through MCP, because
Yes.
you can keep the MCP server updated if the traffic gets routed through the MCP server. If you're updating that, as you should be, it's not as rigid of a contract as an API is.
RESTful API, yeah. Because I feel if you have like even if you imagine you had like a really generic search tool, right? You can even have like, well, now the syntax for how you do this has changed, and here is information on how it is to, like, this is the syntax you can use. Hey agent, this is the syntax you can use for this search tool. And then if my search tool has changed, I'm just changing the description of this tool.
Yeah, cool.
As in,
Okay.
that is just like my caution, because it also is quite funny though. Okay, it is funny because we do know that agents operate very well in simple interfaces. And what is funny is in the article, he makes a case for grep, which
Yeah.
is, if you will, you may be like, oh, it's really simple. I just like a grep for a piece of like text string. Like, it's really like straightforward. Okay, but keep in mind, is a very straightforward interface to a black box functionality. So we do know that agents love simple, right? So there is a tricky one, and there's like, we also reference there's like evals that have been done on like, oh, you give the agent more exposure to these like search configuration and like ranking and all of that. Okay, well, that is working really well because most likely, I don't know for sure, but I'm going to make an assumption. It works really well because the agents have been given the context on how to use them, right? That's my assumption. That is why those evals work out really well. So wouldn't the trick lie in making sure that whatever you provide, whether it is a search API or anything else, that the agent has enough context on how to use it effectively?
Yeah, he's talking about how there he sees like, oh, maybe we should be exposing lower level APIs and
Mm.
opening the engine because
Mhm.
agents are far more capable of manipulating lower APIs than humans. However, I think your heed of warning is don't just go exposing all your lower level APIs because now you have to make sure that those stay up to date and you all of a sudden got yourself into a little bit of a pickle.
Yes. And I would also caution that I am not sure that depending on the type of system, search systems, possibly, agents could be quite good at understanding what the maths behind that is, right? And how you use different things to configure it. To be fair, humans are quite bad at understanding that. So, however, if you think about underlying systems and their interconnected impact on each other, that I still feel like agents need a lot of like if I have my coding agent and I have to have very clear architecture, context provided, the interconnectedness of the system. Because when I having like my stuff deployed on GCP, like I know now I have an agent, if you will, has access to all of the underlying configuration of the cloud infrastructure. I will say that for that agent to be effective, I have to provide it a lot of context and also why certain things are put in place,
Hmm.
because otherwise the ripple effect of changes, even just a simple thing, a problem that I quite recently had was around the GCP Cloud Armor web application firewall settings. So the agent's very good at figuring out how to configure that extremely securely. However, the agent is not, even though he's access to all of my code and all of the Terraform and all of that, it is still not going to be like, okay, but if I change this other API that has this type of body is going to get caught in the WAF rule that I applied, which in theory should have protected. However, how should we actually protect the resource? Well, the resource in this scenario should probably be protected with strict authentication requirements and authorization rules for when we can send that type of payload, rather than a web application firewall that says you cannot have anything that looks like code. Or like it
Hmm.
would be tripping up over like, oh, it's code injection. However, it kind of needed that for that endpoint. So it's my point is that yes, there are probably scenarios where agents can seem really good at understanding those underlying things, but I feel like they're very good at it in isolation rather than the system, unless you provide a lot of context about how the system is architected. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but I
Yeah.
don't trust unless you have provided the agent with the context of your system and the interconnectedness and the implication of changes in one place to another. Don't assume that your agent's just going to magically work it out.
Oof. Great advice, first of all. You are preaching to the choir, I would say.
Okay.
I am in full agreement with you on that, and, I'm going to change gears. I'm going to
Okay,
talk
yeah.
about the well, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess
no,
it's
it's
not
alright. I can
fully
like I
changing
will yeah, let's move on. But I just want to say like just remember people that I agree with the overall thesis of this article.
gears. I do think it's great though that there are nuances to this and there's also different opinions. It's why it's an awesome article to bring out and put forth so that we can say, hey, yeah, like I worked on search systems and I saw there was these problems with this idea that you're recommending. I'm not sure that just throwing an agent into the mix is going to magically solve these problems.
Yeah, like if you want to throw an agent into it, like don't give the like anyway, that's like MCP. I think MCP is underrated. I will keep thinking. I think there's some underrated part to it. But okay, what is the next gear, Demetrius? What's the next gear?
I think I wanted to hit on the idea of agents being able to craft really deep queries in the
Mm,
databases
mm,
and also how they interact with databases using like SQL
mm,
or using just like trying to get what they need from a database and creating their um SQL on the fly
mm,
and then being able to do that in I think here he talked about like you have it goes back to like the doing it
mm.
in isolation, but there's a lot of stuff that you might want
Yeah.
when you've already pulled it from a database. You want to cache that so that if another agent is needing parts of it,
Mhm.
it can grab it. And so I find that fascinating because I don't know how the best in the world are doing this right now. If you think about like the sandbox pattern and then
Yeah.
you think about databases, and again, you've got these agents that are querying databases and grabbing data, and then they've got that data and they've got some wildly complex SQL or join or something, and the compute's already been spent to
Yeah.
get that data.
Yeah.
Now, if another
Well, okay.
agent needs part of it, what's going
Yeah.
on?
Well, okay, but I'm just like my brain is maybe am I not understands correctly? Why are people not just using virtual tables in the database for these complex queries? Like make a virtual table with a complex query, and now you have that table reusable with other people.
But then how does the agent have the context that it's there, and how does it have access to it?
I mean, like then that's the part of the sharing part. Like then you have to figure out how you share the information rather
Yeah,
than sharing the data itself. Do you see what I mean? Like if you
sure.
use your underlying database, it depends on the use case. I'm not fully like sure about the exact use case, but a
Yeah,
virtual table or even a temp table that can be shared, that many database solutions, accommodate for these things. So you do not
huh.
have to recompute the data query.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think about that, but that makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just my first reaction to that. Like that isn't this a partially solved problem, but rather the unsolved problem is how to share the agent context around what is available.
Well, I just feel like you could get into a situation
Uh,
where you have a virtual table sprawl. You already get into those
mhm.
situations when humans are using
Yeah.
data and humans are not creating nearly as many queries as we're asking our agents to do.
Yeah.
Again, if we're thinking about the nature of how these agents work, where they're going to do a lot of things, they're going to
Yeah.
explore a lot of things and
Yeah.
options,
Yeah.
and it's very bursty,
Yeah.
then for a very short amount of time, they're fanning out and they're exploring, and then you've got
Yeah.
that map reduce thing, and so then it
Yeah.
reduces and it converges onto something. You've got a lot of virtual tables that you're now pulling from, and you're eating up a lot of context. I don't think it's
Mm.
impossible because I literally was just talking about, oh, well, agents can now hit on hundreds of links when it comes to like
Yeah.
searching the internet, and they can ingest all that data. So it could be a similar thing. It is just more
Yeah,
how
it
in
depends
real
on.
time are you giving agents the context that
Mm,
like, oh yeah, that information that you're about to run a SQL query on, it's already in this virtual table.
yeah. Now I'm like feeling like I am not like I'm wondering, is this feels like a database solution challenge, and I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if smart database solutions today, if they see the same query again, they are not like I don't know exactly, but it wouldn't surprise me if like
But I don't
databases is
think
a
it
whole science in how they're
yeah,
like are
I don't think it's
architected.
that you get the same query, because that's a
Uh
very rare case. It's that,
yeah.
like, you have edges of the queries
Mm,
that are similar,
okay.
you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know
So
if
like you're
edges.
not like wanting to get the whole so for example, if I had made a query and on my like the famous pet store query, right?
Hmm.
I don't know, pet store example all over the place, but like we have a pet store and I've been searching for all of the pets. So I made a query for all the pets that are under 1 year old in my pet store because I
Yeah.
have some for up for adoption. They got returned. Apparently, people do that to my pet store. But anyway, weird story here. But maybe are you saying, for example, that I have ran a query for that, but you are only interested in rabbits that are under 1 year old? So in theory, you
Yeah.
don't have to run a full query. You can literally just get my already
Yeah.
created thing
And
and
query
filter for
that.
rabbits.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like, anyway, so I'm
Exactly.
thinking out loud to make sure I understand your point. And in this scenario, we're agents.
Yeah, and so how do the agents know that these n number of queries have already been run if you want to go and
Um,
check those before you go and run your query on the full database
yeah.
or on the n number of databases that you have access to?
Mm, mhm. But is it a problem? So we're saying that obviously this in article talks about some of the database, like, um, like there's a lot of traffic. But then the next question is that how real is the problem of requerying?
Yeah, my first instinct goes to it's expensive. It can be very expensive too. I guess you're probably paying more in tokens than you are in compute for
Yeah.
database queries, but who knows? Like there's some expensive queries out there.
Yeah. I just like remembered like a little like funny tricks that were used from the Agentic era, right? And that is literally to have different like okay, so having you have your relational database, right? However, your relational database is good at certain things. So
Mhm.
it's good for quite creative querying, right? And we would have indices and everything set up correctly, or indexes, or whatever we're calling it for database. I remember this has been a debate how we pronounce that. But anyway, you have that set up for your database. But then for the same data, you will also have a key value pair type database like a Cassandra. It's still for the same data, but now it's set up for speed of retrieval, right?
Mm.
Not for
Yeah.
flexibility of querying. And then for flexibility of querying without overburdening the relational database, it used systems like Solar, which is built on Lucene. You have also Elastic that's built on Lucene. So some people then have used those, like, so where you can have a quite creative querying and searching. Now we're back to searching
Mm.
over the data. And then if you then you can find the records based on the metadata, for example, and more extracted attributes of the data. But you can still then go back to the source of truth to find the ultimate like information about it. So if I just think back before the agentic era, we never really had one database you had often one data set which could be retrieved and queried through and one of the problems was keeping all of these things obviously consistent, so that
Yeah.
one thing didn't get massively outdated. Because where do you write to? So then the idea is you write to one place, often the relational database, if that is where you have your data, and then you have the other systems be like consumers of that data, so that you can also query retrieve in different ways. But now I'm just like off on a non-agentic database, so data retrieval discovery
Well, it kind of makes the
architecture.
point, right? That you're going to have many ways that you want to play with the data. And so if the agents are just making way more data tables, even if they are virtual data tables,
Yeah.
that can quickly turn into an absolute mess.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think the other side of it is like, how do you, an agent is generally exploring many different things at once. It's not
Yeah.
so sequential like a human is
Yeah.
exploring. We explore, maybe we'll type in one query, we'll try and understand what we get back from it, we'll analyze the
Yeah.
data, and then we'll manipulate it a little bit more by adding pieces to that query, right?
Yeah.
But agents don't work like that. They explore and they'll fan out, and it's like almost like I see it as a decision tree in a way,
Mm-hmm.
where they'll fan out and they'll try many different things and they'll go down on their decision tree way.
Yeah.
And so, how can you expose to the same agent, whether it's like the hub and spoke model or it is,
Yeah.
or just let's forget about that for now. How can
Yeah.
you expose to this agent that has this intent of answering a question?
Yeah.
Here's all of this data
Mm.
that is part of your session, and it's
Mm-hmm.
probably relevant for you. Maybe check it out. Like, do
Yeah.
something, I don't know, grep around on it or do some
Yeah.
vectorizing. I don't know, but that's
I
one of the questions that's being posed in the article, I think,
yeah.
is maybe there's a better way to look at how we are exposing data and having agents interact with our data.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that is such a big question in not just for agents, but for software systems generally. And therefore, maybe it's one of those situations where this has been a challenge for a really long time.
Yeah.
And it has just become like exponentially more visible because of agents. And because just this simple thing we're talking about, like knowing what data is available, where is it, how can I, like the contextual part of it. My first hackathon solution I ever built was a database discovery tool, so that you can figure out what on earth tables you should even join, because were the right columns even, like how did you know? And it actually did query generation for you based on a graph relationship of all of the database tables within the database. It was a huge database and it was really
It
hard to
was like
navigate it.
semantic layers before semantic layers or what?
Well, this was just using Neo4j, but Neo4j is having like, it was using Neo4j as a graph database to help you understand the database itself. Sorry, now we're
Underneath.
going into Erica's first ever hackathon. But,
Nice.
uh, and this is like, we weren't going to talk about years, but it's many years ago. Uh, And that was basically because I was struggling to navigate this huge database and understanding how I could get the data I needed for the work I was
Right.
doing, right? And my general point is that, yes, this has been frustrating for humans, like figuring out what's available so that you can even get the data for your solution that you need based on everything that was already available. And it's like, it just feels like this has been a problem that's multiplied
Yeah, it's
because,
only being amplified right now.
yeah, that's the word, amplified, not multiplied. Amplified, that's the word.
Both.
Yeah. Multiplied and amplified. But I was looking for the word amplified, to be fair. Like, I couldn't find it in my brain, and you delivered it neatly.
Then I
So,
gave it to you.
yeah, I love it. Thank you. I will receive the word. So, like, I do think that is a pushing, like, the limits of the, like, it's really showing where the problems are. And to be able to enable agents, we really need to face the issues that were already there.
Yeah.
Like, I also just like say that I think it's quite interesting as someone who's into traffic engineering, like all of these systems are chatting to each other, right? It's just traffic, 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 traffic everywhere. And we can keep talking about the systems, but it's, like, I just think about that as well. And I do think that that is agentic traffic handling is with this type of patterns that we're seeing, the sparkiness, the burstiness, like all of that, like even just the searching example, right? We are seeing like a different type of traffic shape, not just in what it looks like, but how it behaves.
Yeah.
So that's quite, interesting to me personally, right? How that transcends, and therefore these systems that are really showing their cracks were often systems that were not designed to be scalable, right? They were never designed for scale. They were designed for like, yeah, the what you were saying, like me sitting in front of my computer. Like, if you have 100,000 humans, they can name, like, the worst you're gonna get is 100,000 concurrent requests. You have 100,000 agents. Now it can be like a weather magnitude you want.
Yeah. That's such a great point. With 100,000 humans, even if they're all using it at the same time, you're getting 100,000 concurrent requests. But with agents, they can just go off. And imagine 100,000 humans using
Yeah,
100,000
agents.
OpenClaws and Hermes
Yeah,
agents, right? And those agents are then spawning their sub agents, and
yeah.
you've got yourself into, yeah, this traffic routing problem. And one thing that
And
I think we can probably leave folks
yeah,
with, and it's been sticking with me, is
yeah,
really what's different now that we know this bursty, very exploratory, and
yeah.
fanning out,
Ephemeral and ephemeral.
ephemeral. Yes. So, what does that mean for whatever we're working on? It is
Yeah.
bursty, it's ephemeral, it fans out, and then it comes back as like that map reduce type of thing to the max. And it also is
Like,
something that we are, yeah. No, maybe
yeah,
I
people
can.
should, like, I think it's a really nice, like, thought exercise. If you own a system and you want not just humans to interact with it, but also agents, don't just think about the how the agent discovers and learns about your interfaces and all of that. Think about the implications. There's like two sides to it. How do you make it useful for agents, but also what is the implications on your system of agents
Um,
using it? And how do you design the workflows of using your systems to be like, like stuff that was mentioned in the article around like be able to snapshot and be able to go back and things like that, be able to make mistakes,
yeah,
right? More freely, like, and explore doing this. Like, how can you design those workflows so they fit the agentic workflow model?
brilliant.
Hopefully people find this. I think if people have the challenge, I think that's a good sign. Like, if you are living with this problem in the product you're building, you're in the right place, I think.
Yeah, and reach out to us and tell us what we got wrong.
Yes. Like, I think that most of the time I'm interested in hearing someone who's like really into databases and what they're doing. I do have some friends at Databricks. It does mention Databricks in the article. Like, I think that's
Talks
quite
about
interesting.
Databricks. Yeah, we can
Yeah,
have somebody on from there, and
yeah,
he also mentions Balpon, which is doing, like, Git for data type thing, since you were talking about that transactionality and almost like the durable execution is becoming the hottest new term of
mm,
2026, I think. And so that's another one where you want to be able to have guarantees that if you have these multi steps
yeah.
happening, you can go back in time and you can make sure that they're going to execute in ways. And so I think there's a few people we could have on to grill them about this and have them
They
tell
can
us,
teach us. They can
yeah, what's
teach
going
us.
on here? Because
We can ask.
we obviously need to learn a little bit.
Well, I think that's the fun part. Obviously, that no, I do not know everything, and like sometimes I feel like my knowledge is like so outdated as well, right? And things are moving so fast. I did have an idea though, Demetrius, and we should get, you know, what we should get? We should get an email that people can email with articles or other things that they think we should
Oh,
check
that we should
out.
know about. Ooh, what a
Yeah.
great idea. Okay, so email us at
Whatever.
debug mode
At whatever
dot.
Linux Foundation. Are we gonna get a Linux Foundation email for that?
We could do it, or Agentic AI Foundation,
Oh, okay,
debug
they have
mode
their
at
own
yeah,
email thing.
AAIF. All right, here it is.
You sort it out.
I'll make this happen. Debug mode at aaif.io. Send us your articles and we will break them down and tell us why they
Yeah.
are interesting to you.
And if you know someone who we should even talk to about it, that would also be great.
Yes. Boom.